She was standing on my balcony, holding a glass of wine, telling my guests to leave my beach house because, according to her, the HOA had transferred it to community control. I thought it was a joke. Then she tried to unlock the front door with her own key. That's when I called the cops. When I bought the beach house in Seabreeze Point, I wasn't trying to start a war. I was trying to disappear. I'd spent most of my adult life working too much, answering too many emails, and living in cities where silence cost more than rent. So when I found a weathered but beautiful two-story place overlooking the dunes, with a wraparound deck and direct boardwalk access to the sand, I knew I wanted it. It wasn't inside the gated section of the neighborhood, which was perfect for me. Technically, it sat just outside the official Seabreeze Point HOA boundary, but close enough that the community entrance, beach maintenance crews, and security patrols all pass nearby. To me, that meant convenience without control. To them, apparently, it meant unfinished business. The first sign that this place came with drama was the closing packet. Buried between utility transfers and insurance paperwork was a strange note from the title company explaining that the previous owner had experienced occasional access confusion with neighboring HOA residents regarding beach easements and community assumptions about the lot. I remember laughing at that phrase, community assumptions, because it sounded so ridiculous. What exactly was I supposed to assume? That people might occasionally forget which house was theirs? I found out fast. The house had been vacant for almost 8 months before I bought it, and during that time, a lot of people in Seabreeze Point had apparently decided that anything not actively defended was fair game. I learned that on my second weekend there, when I came back from the marina with groceries and found 2 women sunbathing on my upper deck like they were at a resort. One of them had her sandals kicked off near my sliding door. The other had a Bluetooth speaker sitting on one of my chairs. I walked up the steps and asked, "Can I help you?" They looked at me like I had interrupted them. One of them, a blonde woman with an expensive visor and the kind of expression that only exists on people who have never once heard the word no, said, "Oh, we're just using the deck while the tide's high." I told them it was private property. She waved a hand dismissively and said, "This lot used to be considered overflow common access." Overflow common access. That phrase was so absurd I almost admired it. I told them to leave. They did, but not before the blonde one looked me up and down and said, "You must be the new owner. Someone should explain how things work around here." That someone turned out to be her. Her name was Linda, though spiritually, she was every HOA Karen you've ever imagined. I met her properly the next morning when she knocked on my front door, holding a laminated packet and a smile that somehow felt more aggressive than a threat. "Hi," she said. "I'm Linda. I'm on the Seabreeze Point HOA Advisory Committee." Advisory Committee. Of course. She immediately started talking like we were in the middle of a disagreement I didn't know I was having. She explained that although my property sat technically outside the formal HOA map, it had historically functioned as a shared-use transition parcel for beach traffic and neighborhood amenities. I stared at her and said, "So what part of that means you think you can use my deck?" She smiled like I was being difficult and said, "Well, the prior owner wasn't exactly engaged." I should have shut the conversation down harder right there, but I made the mistake of trying to be reasonable. I told her politely that I wasn't the prior owner, that my property was private, and that nobody should be on it without permission. She nodded the whole time like she was listening, then ended the conversation by saying, "We'll see how sustainable that is in summer." That was the first real warning. Over the next month, I started noticing little things that didn't make sense unless people genuinely believed my beach house belonged to them. Patio furniture cushions shifted, side gate unlatched. A beach wagon I'd left near the lower stairs moved 20 feet and returned full of sand toys that weren't mine. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note clipped to my railing that said, "Please leave outdoor shower accessible for resident use." Resident use. My outdoor shower. On my house. I installed cameras the next day. That turned out to be the smartest decision I made all year. Because once I could actually see what was happening, the situation went from annoying to insane. People were cutting across the side of my lot to get to the boardwalk. Kids were rinsing off under my shower. Someone used my lower hose hookup to wash sand off a golf cart. And twice, I caught Linda herself walking up onto my deck and looking through the windows like she was inspecting a rental property she managed. The woman didn't just feel entitled, she felt official. That's what made her dangerous. People like that stop seeing reality after a while. They replace it with whatever version of community standards makes them feel important. I put up signs. Private property, no beach access, no trespassing. Didn't matter. I sent a certified letter to the HOA management office clarifying that my lot was not common area, not subject to community use, and not open for access. They responded with one of those slimy non-answers that corporate HOA firms love. We appreciate your concerns and will remind residents to respect neighboring parcels where appropriate. Where appropriate. Translation: they weren't going to do anything. Then came the 4th of July weekend. If you've ever lived near a beach town, you already know what that means. Traffic, noise, tourists, coolers, fireworks, and exactly the kind of chaos that makes entitled people bolder. I had invited a few friends down for the weekend. Nothing crazy, just a small cookout and a quiet evening on the deck. We were grilling around 6 p.m. when my friend Nate came around the side of the house and said, do you know there's a woman upstairs? I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I went up to the second floor balcony and there she was, Linda, standing near the railing with a glass of white wine in one hand and her sandals kicked off beside one of my chairs. Not only was she on my balcony, she had somehow made herself comfortable enough to settle in. I just stared for a second because my brain genuinely refused to process the scene. Then I said, "What the hell are you doing?" She turned around, completely calm, and said, "I'm supervising access. Your guests are blocking what used to be a shared viewing area." My guests. Blocking a shared viewing area. On my balcony? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I probably would have said something that made the rest of the evening way more complicated. I told her to leave immediately. She didn't. Instead, she doubled down. "Actually," she said, "there's been an unresolved ownership issue with this house for years. The HOA has standing interest in this parcel." I said, "No, it doesn't." She took a sip of wine and said, "That's not what our records show." Our records. At this point, half my friends were standing at the top of the stairs, just listening in disbelief. I asked her what exactly she thought she owned. She said, and I will never forget this, "The board has long considered this house under transitional community control until legal boundaries are clarified. That's not a real thing. That's not a legal category. That's not even coherent. It's just something a deeply delusional person says when they've been allowed to cosplay authority for too long." I told her one last time to get off my property. That's when she reached into her beach tote and pulled out a key to my front door. She held it up and said, "If this were truly your house, why would I have access?" The answer, obviously, was that the previous owner or some idiot property manager had failed to recover old copies years ago. But in her mind, that key was proof of ownership. She walked past me, went downstairs, and before I could fully register what she was doing, she slid the key into my front lock and tried to open the door in front of everyone. It didn't work because I had changed the locks the day I moved in, but the sheer confidence of the attempt was honestly breathtaking. That was the moment I stopped treating this like neighborhood drama and started treating it like what it actually was: criminal trespass with a side of delusion. I told Nate to start recording and called the police. Linda laughed when she heard me say it. Actually laughed. "Go ahead," she said. "I'd love to hear what they think when I show them the HOA file." The HOA file. Incredible. We waited on the driveway for about 15 minutes while she paced around near the lower steps like a woman preparing to sue the moon. She called at least 2 people during that time. One of them, I later learned, was the HOA management company's after-hours line, and the other was some board member she kept referring to as Steve from Architectural Review, as if a guy who approved pergolas was going to help her steal a beach house. When the officers arrived, Linda practically sprinted toward them before I could even wave. She launched into a full speech about community parcel confusion, shared use rights, and an ownership dispute involving my home. One of the officers, a middle-aged guy who had clearly seen every flavor of beach town nonsense, let her talk for maybe 30 seconds before asking the only question that mattered. "Ma'am, do you have a deed?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" he repeated. "Do you have a deed, title, lease, or any legal document showing you own or reside at this address?" She started fumbling through her bag and pulled out a photocopied HOA map, a laminated beach access schedule, and what looked like a page from an old neighborhood welcome packet. Not a deed, not a lease, not anything even remotely useful. Meanwhile, I handed the other officer my driver's license, closing documents, current utility bill, and digital property tax record, all on my phone within 30 seconds. Then I showed them the camera footage, deck access, window peeking, repeated trespassing, her trying the key, her standing on my balcony with a drink. The officers watched maybe 45 seconds before the tone of the entire interaction changed. One of them asked Linda, "Did you enter this property today without permission?" She started talking in circles about historical use. He asked again, slower this time, "Did you enter this property today without the owner's permission?" She said, "Well, I believed," and that was enough. The officer cut her off and said, "That's a yes." Then came the part I'll admit I enjoyed a little too much. Right there in front of my house, in front of my friends, in front of two passing golf carts that had conveniently slowed down to watch, the cops gave Linda the kind of reality check no HOA meeting ever could. They explained in very simple words that HOA committees do not magically own private homes outside their recorded boundaries. They explained that old keys do not grant ownership. They explained that community assumptions are not law. And then they informed her that if she returned to my property again for any non-emergency reason, she could be arrested for trespassing. She looked absolutely stunned. Not embarrassed. Stunned. Like the universe had failed to honor an agreement she thought she'd made with it years ago? She kept trying to argue, but every sentence just made her sound more detached from reality. At one point, she actually said, "But everyone knows this house was basically ours." Even the officer had to pause after that one. Eventually, they escorted her off the property and watched until she drove away. I wish I could tell you that was the end. It wasn't. But it was the end of her pretending. The next week, my attorney sent formal trespass notices to Linda and the HOA management company, along with a demand that they identify how many residents had been told, verbally or in writing, that my property was community accessible. Turns out quite a few. Enough that the management company panicked almost immediately. Within days, residents got an email clarifying that my parcel was independently owned and not part of any HOA-controlled common area. Funny how fast clarity arrives once police reports exist. Then came the best part: consequences. Linda was quietly removed from her advisory committee position after I threatened civil action over the repeated trespass and security concerns. The management company also had to send a contractor to remove a small beach access marker someone had installed years earlier near the side of my dune fence, which apparently helped fuel the entire delusion in the first place. I replaced it with a new sign that simply says, "Private Beach House, no HOA access." Elegant, accurate, necessary. Since then, things have been blissfully boring. My deck stays private, my shower stays mine, and nobody has mistaken my balcony for community space ever again. Sometimes, though, I'll be sitting out there in the evening with a drink, watching the sun go down over the water, and I'll think about how confidently Linda stood in my house, trying to claim it like reality was optional. And honestly, that's what makes HOA stories like this so satisfying. It's never really about the deck or the gate or the beach house. It's about people who get so used to acting like they own everything around them that one day they run face first into an actual property line. And when they do, nothing is funnier than watching a badge, a deed, and a locked front door remind them who's really in charge. So tell me, if someone showed up at your house claiming they owned it because of the HOA, what would you have done? Drop your opinion in the comments and subscribe for more HOA revenge and entitled neighbor stories.